it was never going to feel exactly the way last season felt, right? Like it took 16 years to break through. And then the way that the team broke through, this like collective populist movement where like you're shining laser beams into the sky and everyone is acknowledging that that's cool. And like all of a sudden it feels like this something special happening. And that like recapturing that or replicating that was always going to be probably never going to happen quite the same way. But I'm wondering, the Kings enter Tuesday's action, as you said, 6th seed in the West, sole possession of that seed right now. They're earning their keep with the likes of the Mavs and the Suns underneath them. And they swept the Lakers and they're, continually putting up good fights against good teams. And they're a game off of last year's pace through 67 games. But how has this season felt? Like you're trying to author this encore. You're watching a team trying to like find last year's formula, but having to iterate on it. What is the experience of watching like the year after the year been like?
It's been tough. And after the Kings mostly did nothing in the offseason, we kind of expected something similar to this, but even when you see it coming, it's still frustrating. So the expectation for most Kings fans going into the year was similar record, but a worse seed. We were pretty realistic that 48 wins normally doesn't get you the 3 seed. Right. Last year was a very weird year. So there was that expectation that their wins are probably going to be in that same ballpark, but the West will be stronger, so they'll be further down, which is almost exactly how it's played out. They're like I said, right on pace for right about where they finished last year within a win or two. And they're the 6th seed right now and kind of stressing about the play-in and all that. And it's just kind of a more normal standings as far as where that record puts you. But even seeing it coming, it's still been incredibly frustrating. It was just a lot more fun when, the home stretch of the season was just, enjoying and seeing how many wins you could get and not stressing too much about the seeding or the matchups or any of that just yet. That being said, I try not to take it for granted. It's still an incredible season because of everything we went through before. It's we're complaining about only being the 6th seed after years and years of, not even being close to the playoffs. So, it's still, Kings fans, I think, are probably a little bit better equipped than most just because we did go through so many bad years that we can appreciate a good year that's not a great year. But it is frustrating because you want that team to continue to grow and continue to build on what they did before, even though the front office didn't make any big moves, either in the offseason or at the trade deadline. So it's you're just kind of banking on internal growth that hasn't necessarily happened, which is frustrating. But there's still been plenty of good things and plenty of great wins along the way. And like you said, sweeping the Lakers makes every season better.
That's right. If you weren't with me at my Rondo trade with the pick swap going out, then you don't deserve me at my Sabonis triple doubles. It's funny, you mentioned that like general, very sober view, and it's almost difficult when you're actually right about it, right? When you're like, I project it this way, and then it happens, and you're like, well, I was kind of hoping it would be different than that. But I was going through, I wrote about the Kings for today. It'll be up at probably up by the time this comes out at Yahoo Sports. And about that kind of how do you author the encore to the critical darling season, that kind of thing. And there's a moment where I'm like, well, the Kings went from the number 1 offense in the NBA last year to the number 13 offense in the NBA right now. And I'm like, well, where are they falling off? And you start going through all the numbers and you're like, pretty much the same, pretty much the same, pretty much the same. And you're like, oh, they dropped 5 spots because the Pelicans, Clippers, Thunder, and Pacers and a bunch of these other teams all just jumped up. Mm-hmm. It's not like the Kings got demonstrably worse. And there are some areas where, the free throw rate's down or they're not generating as much rim pressure. And there's stuff to analyze and poke at. But there is a component of it that's this is about who they are. The league just kind of, the tide rose up a little bit and left them a bit more wobbly. And so that's why you come to this place in the season where, and I will admit, I'm not entirely sure what to make of them for the reasons we're talking about. The record is good. They're outscoring teams by about a point a game this season, not as good. 13th ranked offense, 20th on defense. Things have trended a little more positively recently for them, but not great overwhelming numbers. I guess just broad strokes. Do you feel like the Kings are more or what's the overall relative quality of the team? Is it more this is who the record says they are, or who that kind of point differential says they are?
So the challenge has been that it's both. I mean, they are two different teams. It completely depends on the night. So the net rating kind of being middle of the road and not quite matching the record is just indicative of the inconsistency. So the fact that they're so up and down depending on their opponent is the biggest frustration and the biggest, like, who is this team? Why can't they figure it out? Why can't they bring it consistently? But the one thing we have seen is that they have consistently been playing well against better teams. Like, so many of their losses this year are against the Rockets. They've lost a game to the Pistons. They lost to the Hornets. Like, they've lost some really just awful, embarrassing games that they just like mentally weren't checked in for. But when the team is engaged and firing on all cylinders, they look fantastic still. The one good team they really struggle with is the Pelicans. The Pelicans just have absolutely had their number and just destroy them with, their length and physicality. And that's kind of the blueprint of the type of teams that have given the Kings trouble all year. But, for the looking ahead for like what it means in the playoffs, like I'm actually still somewhat optimistic because they do get up for games against good teams. And so in the playoffs, you're playing good teams. So
Right.
the hope would be that you're engaged and executing and playing to full potential. But, we still have pretty realistic expectations. It's like, it'd be cool to make the second round this year, but the way it's gone, like, who knows,
Right. But that's important too. Yeah. I was talking to somebody about this. I guess it was before the trade deadline. From a Knicks perspective, I am from New York. I'm a Knicks fan, by damage. And the question was like, if they don't make this big swing move, or if they don't add like an all-star talent, will you feel like it's like a waste? And I was kind of like, there's a moment where you're saying, I do think that the best version of that team can close the gap on some of the best teams. But also I have to remember that almost the entirety of my adult life was spent watching really bad basketball, and like that any incremental movement toward positivity or just keeping last year's positivity is still so far removed from what you like the slog you've been through for most of your professional career or semi-professional career, whatever this is that I do. You saw the lack of professionalism right before we got on the air, as I didn't have my microphone plugged in. Cool podcasting, Devine. But that having those realistic expectations, it's still, I mean, when you get there, you still want to be able to kind of have the feeling that there is an upside to be reached for. And I think you mentioned, I think it's like 18-9 is the total record against all the other Western play-in teams, except if you remove the Pelicans, just slide those guys over to the side and say, enjoy the 4-5 bracket, guys. You guys, whichever side of that, hang out over there and we'll catch you later. I wonder if, based on the general lack of conversation, level of conversation around the Kings, we are perhaps underselling the optimistic case. Maybe we'll get back to that for a second.